Howdy, and welcome back to another episode of Waxing with Wade. This is going to be episode number 14, and when I did last week's episode, the Eagles Christmas single, when I went looking for it, it was in a box of all of my old 45s and singles that I have collected over the years, and that inspired me to do something a little different for probably this episode and the next episode, because I believe this is going to be a two-parter. We'll see how the time goes. But this episode is going to be titled something like Wade's Miscellaneous Collection of 45s and Weird Singles. And many of them are great songs, many of them are memorable songs, and many are throwaways that, are just kind of interesting. I thought everyone would love seeing all these. They range from 1956 to 1983. 1956 would be the year before my parents got married, 6 years before I was born. And 1983 would be the year I turned 21. Before I get into the episode, I first want to mention, you may have noticed laying right here, this beautiful remastered REM Automatic for the People, their great 1992 album that included the hit Everybody Hurts, and also Night Swimming and Man on the Moon, which ultimately was made into a film about Andy Kaufman and featured the song Man on the Moon, and I believe REM did other songs on that soundtrack. My daughter Catherine gave me this for Christmas. I don't have a lot of newer vinyl, which this is a newer pressing of an older album. I love having this though because I'm a huge REM fan. Now we'll move on from that to my singles. I'm going to go mainly in chronological order. I'm going to throw out some trivia, just some of them I'm just going to show you, and you can see what it looked like, and it's going to be something for everyone here. It's not all rock and roll, though most of it is. I'm going to start out, though, before getting into the chronological singles, show you two of my prizes in my collection. These are in really good shape. A lot of these aren't playable that I'm going to show you. They're just fun to look at. But here I don't remember where I picked this up, but this is the original Imagine single by John Lennon from 1971, the classic masterpiece, Imagine, on the original Apple label. And this is unique because this is an original Beatles single on Apple from 1969, and it was unusual in that it was a double A side. It wasn't a hit with a deep cut on the back. It was a two-hit single with Come Together and Something, one of the most gorgeous songs ever written, in my opinion, by George Harrison with the Beatles. So they decided to release two singles on one record in 1969 from the album Abbey Road. I love these and I love having them, but I probably not going to play them because they're just maybe too valuable to be playing. All right, let's start in 1956. I've got two piles I'm pulling from here, so I'm going to be mixing back and forth, but I'm still going to try to go chronologically. I've got a pile with sleeves because they all stack and fit together, and I've got a pile without sleeves, just bare records, and some of them are cracked. They're really rough. I would never try to play them, but again, they're cool to look at. Okay, here we go, all the way back to 1956. Chuck Berry, Roll Over Beethoven. And this is a later release. This isn't an original. This came out in the 70s, I believe, a double hit side. It's not worth anything, but what's cool is it's got My Ding-a-Ling on the back, because that song came out in the early 70s. It's a novelty song. It's hilarious. You should listen to it if you've never heard My Ding-a-Ling by Chuck Berry. Okay, here we go. 1957, here's a good old Carl Perkins single on Sun Records. Sun, the famous recording label from Memphis. It featured Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison, Elvis Presley, and Jerry Lee Lewis. Let's see. Next we have from 1958, Pearl Bailey, Ain't Misbehavin'. That's an oldie. So a lot of these belong to my parents. We got also from 1958, Little Richard, Good Golly Miss Molly. And this one's unusual in that it's technically not a 45. It's a 33 1/3 on a 7-inch, like a 45, that has 4 songs on it, 2 on each side. It's called an EP back in the day. Okay, then we got another 1958, I believe it is, Carl Perkins, called Jive After 5. And we got a 1958 Johnny Cash and the Tennessee 2 called The Ways of a Woman in Love. Pretty cool. All right, now we got the Andrews Sisters from 1959. 1, 2, 3, 4 by the Andrews Sisters. Bugle Boy of Company B, you probably know that song by them, or your parents would. This is a 1960 famous single by Elvis Presley on RCA Victor, Are You Lonesome Tonight? That was my parents, for sure. Here we go from 1961, the Everly Brothers with Ebony Eyes, one of their hits. Here we go from 1964, a beautiful song that I love, my parents loved. I remember they played it a lot when I was a kid. This one's cracked and really beat up, but it's Everybody Loves Somebody by Dean Martin. And I'm still a huge Dean Martin fan, his singing and the movies he was in, especially John Wayne, Rio Bravo. Great performance by Dean Martin if you've never seen it. Let's see what's next. From 1966, I believe this is, or 67, no, or 68 actually, is Scarborough Fair by Simon and Garfunkel, with April Come She Will on the backside. And here's from 1968, Hush by Deep Purple, their first big hit, I believe. Before they were really a heavier rock band, this is a little bit more of a pop song in my opinion, and you may be familiar with it. Hush. Here we go from 1970. Tell you something kind of cool about this. This is Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin from Led Zeppelin 3. But what's cool about this is on the back is Hey, Hey, What Can I Do? Which was never released on an album. It was only available on this single. Of course, it showed up on compilation albums over the years after the demise or the death of John Bonham and when Led Zeppelin was no longer recording. But you hear this song on the radio, Hey, Hey, What Can I Do? I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. It was the flip side of Immigrant Song. Okay, and then also from the next year, 1971, Black Dog by Led Zeppelin. Now that's a famous song you still hear a lot. It's got Misty Mountain Hop on the back. Of course, this was from Led Zeppelin 4 album, or actually Untitled. It was their 4th album. Now here's a really cool collector's item. From 1971, Buy the World a Coke by the New Seekers. I'd like to teach the world to sing. I'd like to buy the world a Coke. All the hippies and people singing on the mountaintop. I'm sure all of you that are 60 or over probably remember that, but if you're younger than that, you may not. You could ask your folks about it, or you could probably see that video on YouTube. actually in the pretend world of TV on the show Mad Men. The famous Don Draper, not to do a spoiler, but in the final episode, I believe it was, in the final season, and they were an ad agency, he pitched this Teach the World to Sing ad to Coca-Cola, which was really cool. Of course, he was a fictional character and all, so that didn't really happen, but it was cool that they mixed that with real history. Let me check the clock, see how much more time I have before I have to move on to another, before I have to split this episode, because I don't want to run more than 15 minutes. Here's one of my mom's favorite songs, There Goes My Everything by Elvis Presley from 1971. It was from his film, as it says here. It's coming soon from his new album, Elvis Country, and it's got an advertisement on this from his film, That's the Way It Is, which came out in 1970 before this single. Okay, what else we got here? 1972, the cover of the Rolling Stone by Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. This song was written by Shel Silverstein, and if you're not familiar with Shel Silverstein, you should look him up. He was good buddies with Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. He wrote quite a few songs for them. Most of them were funny. He was a children's author, a poet, an author, songwriter. He did a little bit of everything. He wrote Where the Sidewalk Ends. Some of you may have had that book for your kids at one time. It's a very famous children's book. Here is the original 1972 School's Out single by Alice Cooper, which, as you know, I featured that album on my second Waxing with Wade episode, I believe. And then here we have from 1973, Nazareth, This Flight Tonight. Here's an interesting tidbit about this song. This was one of their early hits. It wasn't huge, but it was a hit. This is actually a Joni Mitchell song from the critically acclaimed 1971 album Blue. And I never realized it, but I played those songs side by side or one right after the other recently, and I was, wow, it is a little bit rocked up version of her song. Very cool. 1973, one of my very favorite songs of all time, Money by Pink Floyd from the album Dark Side of the Moon. Here we go, 1974, Dolly Parton, I Will Always Love You, the original. It's pretty beat up, but of course Whitney Houston had the huge hit with that later. Let's see. Losing my place here. Also from 1974, the novelty song that I remember for sure. I was 12 years old. Most of you will if you're old. The Streak by Ray Stevens. It was all over the radio in 1974 for several months when streaking had become popular in pop culture. And then let's see. Also from 1974, one of my favorite cool songs by the Guess Who, Clap for the Wolf. And I'm not saying Guess Who, it's by the band, the Guess Who. Clap for the Wolfman, which was about Wolfman Jack, the time famous DJ and radio personality who later went on to host the television show, The Midnight Special, which I remember, people my age will remember that show because that's one of the few times you got to see a band live. Now, they were lip syncing usually, but see what they looked like playing their songs on stage on the show, The Midnight Special. This is several years before MTV came along, and unless you saw them on the news or an occasional performance like on the Ed Sullivan Show, like the Beatles were, Johnny Cash Show, which ran for a couple of years, had some great artists and music on there. But in general, you just couldn't see many live bands unless you went to the concert. So the Midnight Special, Wolfman Jack was the host, and Clap for the Wolfman, good old hit. I think I'm gonna cut it off. Let's go a couple more. No, I think I better cut it off here because I'm approaching my 15 minutes. This will be part 1, and I'll pick it up in 1975 with part 2 in my next episode.